Hello, I'm Philip Stoughton for EMS Now. I'm here at Inside Flextronics in Paderborn, and I'm joined by Ron Keith, who's the CEO of Riverwood Solutions. Ron, thanks for stopping by to chat. Great presentations this morning, really good insight. I particularly liked the opening with the history lesson. Just simple, how we got to where we got to, and it's just a massive journey. And you have to look at it and look at the numbers that you put up there, and you have to ask, does EMS make economic sense? Does it actually work and function properly as an industry?
So I think it suffers from some of the same problems a lot of industries suffer from. You know, it has relatively low barriers to entry, and so it attracted a lot of companies, and the industry hasn't consolidated enough. So there's still an excess of capacity. In the 2008 downturn, a lot of companies took out of a lot of capacity, but not enough capacity. And as product has migrated to lower cost locations or has regionalized to places like Mexico and Brazil, a lot of the higher cost legacy capacity hasn't come out. So there are operations in higher cost locations that have been passed down. We visited an EMS provider in France a couple of weeks ago, and this EMS provider bought an OEM factory that was bought by an EMS provider that didn't want to send it down, so they sold it to another EMS provider who sold it to a third EMS provider. And at some point in time, some of these factories, you have to look at them and go, you know, it's a $40 million factory in the wrong location that 4 different people have wanted to sell. At some point in time, maybe you just got to consolidate that capacity out.
Yeah.
And until a bunch of those hard decisions get made, I think there are edges of the industry that are a little bit marginal financially. Right. But in general, the last 4 or 5 quarters, the industry as a whole has healed quite a bit. Okay. Margins are on a slight uptick. Balance sheets are a little bit more repaired. So it does work, but there's some hard decisions that have to be made.
Okay. And there was this real interesting graph in terms of the skewing from the different tiers. You know, tier 1 with 6 players, tier 2 with maybe 18 players. Then you get down to tier 4. 10,000 or 10,500 players. Is that where the overcapacity is, or is the overcapacity in the kind of upper mid-range?
I don't think it's necessarily in the tiers. I think it is more specific geographic capacity. Mm-hmm. Having said that, the easiest way to consolidate it out is for some of the tier 4 players to go away. The last thing any industry needs is the weakest player. The weakest player that isn't looking to build a good business. They're looking to get through next quarter, right, and not be insolvent. And so they will make short-term pricing decisions that are bad for everybody. Yeah. And what they're trying to do is delay the inevitable. They're not trying to build something of value. They're trying to be successful by the avoidance of failure. Okay. And that's not good for the industry.
Okay. And 2 of the key areas of movement in terms of the trend as we've seen things change, and you talk about going from that kind of kitted assembly where you get a box of parts and you build and you ship it back, pure service, really nice and straightforward, low risk, and perhaps appropriately quite a low margin. Now we seem to have shifted to a model where there's much more involvement through the process, much higher risk, all kinds of different risk, but still not much more in terms of margin. Why has that risk shift happened? Is it just because the OEMs could get away with it?
I think that's part of it. There's a couple of things going on. One gets back to the overcapacity, and so what will the weakest player do? And the weakest player, what they do, if they don't get deselected out of the pool, starts to become normative.
Right.
And so it's kind of cancerous on the financial health. But the other thing that you're seeing there is what I call the law of big numbers. Mm-hmm. When I used to drop you a kit, I might pay you $30 to assemble a board. But now if you're going full turnkey on, you know, a server that's got 8 processors on it, you know, you might be looking at, you know, a product that's got $30 in labor and $28,000 in material. So I am placing with you big numbers.
Yep. So
if I'm Dell or if I'm Motorola or if I'm Siemens or Bosch, and I'm giving you a contract for $50 or $60 million, the fact that you seek to make 3% is kind of lost. What gets talked about is I just gave you $50 million worth of business, and therefore I expect this or I expect that. And so it gets lost in those large numbers. That was, you couldn't really get lost in the turnkey, in the consigned, because the numbers never really got big enough to hide anything or to have false expectations based on top line.
Yeah. And in the consigned, you were getting paid for what you did, which was assembled product. So $440 billion industry. How much of that is the buying and selling of a bill of materials?
We're trying we're trying to figure that out. There are some products where 91.5%, 92% of the top line is bill of material. And there are products, industrial products that are complicated to assemble but don't have really expensive processors and memory that are 68, 69. We think the industry as a whole is about 83.5%, 84% of revenue. Every penny.
So that probably gives us less than $100 billion worth of service and $350 billion worth of purchasing that's moved from OEMs to EMS.
I'm not sure, what was the first number?
100 billion.
So 100 billion, yes.
Yeah. So if you have 440 and
even a little bit less than that.
Yeah, ballpark. That's kind of fascinating, isn't it? Because if you look at the start of the industry when it was in the 40, 50 billion stage, it was probably a much higher percentage of
Well, it's interesting, so many of the players, including Flextronics, they talk about this growth from A to B, Flextronics from 100 million to 30 billion at one time. And a lot of it was organic and a lot of it was acquisition. But even the organic, it wasn't organic in terms of the underlying market is expanding that fast. Combination of those, the market was expanding and we are doing more of the same things that the OEMs were previously doing. And so what was a $30 kit is, might be a $100 turnkey, it might be $25,000 in turnkey. And then you add on to that some of the ancillary services and you add on to that some of the vertical stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of buying plastics, I'm buying them for myself. Instead of buying fabs, I'm fabbing them myself. And so, is it organic growth, but it isn't that the underlying electronics industry was growing that fast. It was just an absorption of a lot of activity.
Yeah, so that's where the turnover comes from.
Yeah.
Where does the profit come from? Does the profit come from, it doesn't come from PCBA because that couldn't be more Me Too, could it?
So, it depends on what company and how they price things. We find that there are companies that are good at sticking to a price and giving a reasonably competitive price, but will just absolutely hammer you on anything that is outside the box.
Right.
An ECO, a new stencil, a change in forecast. So there are people that try and make it that way. A lot of the industry makes its money in PPV.
Yeah.
And the last time we did any type of meaningful survey on that, and it's hard to get the real data because people want to hide it and pretend it's not there. But it is kind of the elephant in the room. The last time we did any type of meaningful...
I always think of it as the dirty little secret of the industry.
That everybody knows and just, the last time we looked at it, it was over 100% of industry profit.
Right.
Over 100%.
Yeah.
And that was a sample of 10 different suppliers, but...
Yeah. But that's the biggest part of the industry, so maybe that makes sense. Last question, quickly, you mentioned outsourcing 2.0. What do you mean by that? And is outsourcing 2.0 better than outsourcing 1.0 or 1.3 or 1.5?
Depends on which side of it you're on. Outsourcing...
It's going to be better for both, surely, for it to really work. For
over the long term, but it has to find its way.
Yeah.
So I've occasionally done some work for some financial institutions, hedge funds, private equity funds, and there used to be and still is quite a bit of financial engineering involved in those types of businesses. And part of outsourcing 2.0 is not about manufacturing, right? It's about the manipulation and structuring of balance sheets between two entities. So all of this inventory still needs to be purchased. Who is going to purchase it and who is not going to purchase it? And so rather than it being like outsourcing 1.0, which was about specialization, is about division of labor. I'm really good at this, you're really good at that, we both benefit. A lot of outsourcing 2.0 is, I am going to take my problems, I'm going to force them onto someone else's balance sheet. My balance sheet looks better, and I'm going to call that supply chain innovation.
Okay.
And it's not supply chain innovation. It's moving things around to make it look like the whole. And that's why I showed the chart crossing, which is, for every dollar better the balance sheet of the OEMs gets, the balance sheet of the EMS providers get $1 worse. So there's no value created in that transaction. It's just a movement of value.
It's just movement, as it is with that movement of purchasing power and that movement of materials.
Yes.
Thanks very much for your time, Ron. I know we've got some more sessions this afternoon. I'm looking forward to those. We'll probably talk again maybe later today or tomorrow. And
sounds good. Thank you.
Some of the other topics.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.